So I do want to introduce our speaker. So Sinclair, you're going to be speaking first, so stand up so we know who you are. This is Sinclair Black, FAIA. He's a colleague of Andrew Verneuil, and partner. He's a fellow of the AIA, but he's also most recently a fellow of the Congress of New Urbanism, of which there are only 12 nationally. In just a few weeks at the Texas Architects Convention, he will be a recipient of the Lifetime Design Award, which is amazing.
Start the timer. Good morning. Thank you, David. Generous introduction. Appreciate it. I took your title, macro to micro, very literally. And so I'm going to start with macro, wind up with micro, and then go back to macro for a moment. Okay. How do you use this thing? Center? No. Advance. Picking up where Charles Waldheim left off yesterday, the DNA of Austin. A lot of you probably know something about Austin. I know a lot about it. I went there to school in 1958 and only left once. The DNA, you start with a lake, 2 creeks, 1 swale, which is Congress Avenue, and 2 hills. One's the Capitol and one is the University Tower. That's Austin. Thank you very much. And then it maps out like this. The campus, where there are about 80,000 people a given day. The Capitol complex, where there are about 30 and will be more. And downtown, where there's about 80 to 100, maybe more, and a lot of people live there now. This is Austin in 1997. This is Austin in 2012. That was 4 years ago. Well, at any given time, there's about 10 cranes going in Austin, sometimes more than that. So it's a rapidly growing city. I read the other day, for many years I've been reading that it's the fastest growing city in the country, but I don't know whether that's okay or not, but it is. The geography of opportunity, I'm real interested in this aspect of Austin. That diagram there is a diagram of the corridors, some of the corridors, and some of what we call black holes: university land, state land, military, TxDOT land that just sold last year for a major mixed-use development next to this freeway, a large state area north of campus. This is about 70, 80 acres, maybe more than that. Mueller Development, you may be aware, is a very successful whole community and still growing. The state complex, which we refer to as the worst black hole of all, where the state buildings are, and then multiple corridors. South Lamar is growing very rapidly, and then there's the entire Riverside area, which is being reinvented from roach-infested student housing to pretty nice, mixed use. This is I-35 corridor, that red mark through the city. That is, you'll see at the end, we're really working hard to get rid of it. That's the state. When I say the word black hole of all, that's what I'm talking about, is those terrible buildings, 13.5 acres of parking, of land area. There's really more parking than that, and it's only about 70% occupied by state officials, state people. So for years we've been doing projects like this with students. This is a student project where this whole southwest quadrant here has been the subject of great interest for a long time. This was done before about $1 billion worth of development, all of which is nearing completion. The library at the corner of downtown, Symposiun power plant, which is back over there, the green water treatment plant. We'll get to see part of those. And this is what's on the horizon right now. I think I skipped one. If I can go back. No, I didn't. Anyway, yeah, this is existing condition. This is a drawing that we did showing what would happen if we adopted the Vancouver model of point tower, streets defined by the base of the building and density achieved up higher, so the people in the neighborhoods back here still have their view. And it worked in Vancouver, it worked in Portland. It's beginning to work in Austin. The first point tower is built, 700 feet tall, sells for about $1,000 a square foot per condominium, in case you need one in Austin. And it's kind of on the horizon. Going back, and also at the macro level, this was a study that we did in the 70s. And I did it with a federal grant and some students. 120 miles of creeks, 240 miles of edge. It was a federal program asking for ideas about city edges. So I just looked at my hand and said, well, that's Austin right there. 18 major creeks flowing into Town Lake. It's kind of been called the foundation document for the parks and linear spaces of Austin. Waller Creek is being redeveloped now right in here from the lake up close to the university. Shoal Creek is pretty much a trail, most of its way already. A couple of, Zilker Park, of course, is there, and that South Austin neighborhood has a beautiful little creek. 240 miles of creek edge. That's 5-minute walking distance from that. These maps were done in about 74, 5, and it became the bicentennial gift to the nation. And after that, there was about $20 million spent over the years on various parks and trails on some of these creeks. So Teal Plaza was a competition among developers. We worked for Ken Hughes, who developed Mockingbird Station. Unfortunately, Ken passed away later, and we didn't get the project. But you can see it's 11 acres right next to downtown. That's just a diagram of it and sort of a tally of things, of mixed-use buildings. And that's a little pictorial diagram. Next to downtown, we proposed a major hotel, office building, and point condo, and then those other buildings behind, and the rail, the existing rail goes there now. So we developed this building type. What you're looking at there, you're on about the second or third floor, courtyard, private, semi-private courtyard for the residents. Retail on the street edge, parking in between, sandwiched in there. It varied from one level of parking to 3, depending on the density allowed, which was a function of how close to downtown it was. Green water treatment plant. Check the time. My timer quit. Green water treatment plant was about a 7-acre area that was defined by, that's the green water treatment plant there, which is now almost built out, not quite. That's what it looked like at the time of that competition. That was just an early diagram of what could happen there. Some very rough sketches of what that 2nd Street could wind up as at the creek, with trails on the creek. And then that is the site for our new public library by Lake Plato, which is almost finished. And that's Symposiun power plant in the background, which was abandoned in the 70s. That was, you see it here, and that's a segue to Seahome, located at the corner of downtown, basically on Shoal Creek and on Town Lake. This is the intake structure. Water was shipped up here to cool the generators and then dumped back in here. This peninsula is man-made so that the hot water went that way and the cool water came this way. That was it at about 1958 or 60 or something like that. It was the last power plant in the U.S. built as a building. That was a student model of it. I actually got the Austin Energy to pay that student for a summer internship to build that model. That's the plant before work started. That's the inside before work started, or after work started. Some of the equipment is gone. It is, and I've traveled an awful lot and been to a lot of interesting buildings. I've never been to an interior as interesting as that. You're on the main mezzanine. This is underneath that last one. And so this floor is 91 feet from the peak of the roof. And the mezzanine and the floor are all perforated with holes for generators and other things. So it's beyond Piranesi. It now has an occupant. That site now, that's the building right there. And that site, this was all oil tanks and things for the plant and older plants that had been taken down. There's the Lake Plato Library. There's green water treatment buildings under construction. And then this is a grocery store and restaurants and courtyard. And this is a condo there with parking. All of that has been accomplished in 5 or 7 years or less. Along the way, you can see all of that here coming across. My office is right there. Some of you have been there with David. Every year he comes trooping in with a group of students. We designed this. We were the design architects. Paige was the architect of record. And that was a real early sketch that I did, oh gosh, now 15 years ago or more. And then, that's what it turned out like. It's 230 units on 1.74 acres, or 130 units per acre, which is quite dense. It's almost the limit. Push it beyond that, it's pretty difficult. That's the east facade, which I think is my favorite. It's a very simple building based on early 20th century buildings in New York and Chicago, where all you have to do is follow the code, provide access egress. 60% of the units face out, 40 face in, and you've got whoa, what happened there? You've got 160-foot square courtyard in the middle. 16 full-grown trees are in there now. And the south edge of it became part of the Great Streets program. Great Streets master plan we did, there's that site, and all the way across here to Seahome. All of these things are packed together. This is a typical, we did 9 prototype streets. This was a unique prototype. In other words, it wasn't a prototype, it was a unique street. It's 2nd Street, and it's unique because it's the retail street now for Austin. We searched everywhere to find a photograph of 2nd Street. For a long time, we couldn't find one. And then I found one in my own slide collection. Apparently, I'm the only person ever who was dumb enough to photograph such an ugly street. That was it. This is now. So we're pretty proud of that. This is it early in the morning. On a nice weekend and the evening, you just can hardly get around there. That's in the evening. Now, coming down toward micro, from macro, how's my time? This is is an infill project. It was a single-family house on an acre plus a little. So we got 8 buildings, 16 units, and in 8 duplexes, and no garages facing out to streets, which is sort of a pathological commitment on my part, not to have garages face the street. This is what it turned out like. The 8 buildings are all different. Each duplex is different side to side. The materials vary a little. The stone treatment is different on every building. The color of the roof is slightly different on every building, but it's just composition. They're all in a plus or minus gray. And the front doors are all antique. So it's a pretty successful project, I think. That's it, all grown in after 10 years or more. My biggest mistake in life was not buying 2 or 3 of these units because they sold above the market, which is maybe why I didn't. And then a year later, the people that did buy could sell them for double that. This was a fun little project called Tiny Victories. That's the name of the competition held by the local AIA. Tiny Victories had a program like this: 200 square feet, no plumbing, no kitchen, electrical, maybe a fan, well ventilated, well protected, 200 square feet. Ours was 11 by 18. So in that competition, they had a bunch of entries and they chose 4, and they're building out a lot of them. Will eventually be a community of 140 living units for the chronically homeless. These are people who probably will never go back inside of a real house. And of course, everybody donated their time, of course. McCoy's Lumber donated some of the material, sold the rest at cost. And that was our competition entry. That was our energy considerations outlined. And that was the first one built. 2 more are scheduled to be built, and maybe more after that. But I could live there. I may someday. Okay, now we're going to get really down to the micro. That's my design drawing for a doghouse, which we built in the shop at school and donated it to the San Antonio Humane Society. They auctioned it off for about $2,000. It was a little bit bigger than this podium, about this tall, and it was built out of corian. In other words, these were 2 different colors of corian. That's a transparent acrylic roof, and I call it, what was his name? Some European architect, but I called it his name, Eat Your Heart Out. Reconnect Austin is the name of a volunteer group that we sponsored. To know how to get that movie to go, just punch it.
Austin, Texas. This is our city, and the highway that divides it, I-35. Austin was originally laid out as a perfect grid, with East Avenue as the eastern boundary. Until the late 1950s, East Avenue looked like this, a wide boulevard. Today it looks like this, everyone's nightmare. The most congested roadway in Texas. A recent TxDOT study estimates Austin's I-35 congestion as costing commuters almost 3 million hours a year, at an annual cost of over $110 billion. We applaud TxDOT's efforts to solve our horrific congestion. They plan to rebuild I-35 through downtown, with additional lanes and safer ramps. But we must also consider how we can create value for the city. I-35 and its frontage roads are physical, social, and economic barriers. What if we could reclaim the I-35 corridor through downtown Austin, reconnecting the street grid and restoring East Avenue in the process? Imagine the main lanes of the interstate below ground, covered at ground level with a continuous cap, replacing the former frontage roads with a civilized urban boulevard appropriate for all users, creating more driving options for city traffic, plus opening the way for new parkland and high-quality development. Our purpose is to reconnect Austin back to the future. This plan improves regional mobility by increasing capacity with more lanes, reduces congestion by relocating local traffic, and adds 60% more east-west connections, increasing accessibility into downtown. We can reconnect our city with great streets, separating high-speed freeway traffic from our city traffic. We can create a pedestrian, bicycle, and transit-friendly environment, provide a higher quality of life, and facilitate the social and economic exchange that cities are founded upon. 2nd Street, pictured here, is the best success story to date of Austin's Great Streets program, a truly radical transformation and huge benefit, both economically and socially. Looking east on 5th Street from downtown, the barrier of the highway is obvious. But consider this. With the highway hidden below ground, this intersection is once again a viable part of our city. Voila! Human-scale development in an urban environment. Let's see it again. Remove the barrier. Connect the grid. Re-engage with your city. A place for people, sidewalks with shade, a vibrant community. We can solve our traffic problems and address the negative impacts of I-35 with a technology called cut and cap. The freeway main lanes are in the cut, which is covered with a cap that blocks freeway noise and a ventilation system removing vehicle pollutants from the air, making I-35 a better neighbor for everyone. Like Austin, cities across the country are struggling with aging, congested highways that divide their cities. In Dallas, there is a new cap over the Woodall-Rogers Freeway. Clyde Warren Park opened in October of 2012. It is already a huge success. Boston reconnected downtown to its own waterfront, as well as the historic North End neighborhood, improving traffic flow, saving commuter time, and creating new parkland. Other cities have capped over rail lines and parking to create usable urban space. New York's subway system is a cut and cap, even along Park Avenue. Millennium Park in downtown Chicago is a cap over rail lines. And Houston's Discovery Green is a downtown park over underground parking. Massive taxpayer dollars are already being invested in projects along I-35, including the Waller Creek Tunnel and its associated tax increment financing zone, Plaza Saltillo and the land owned by Capital Metro, the existing and growing Medical and Innovation District, the proposed University of Texas Medical School and Teaching Hospital, and of course the University of Texas campus. Ours is a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The time to act on this vision is now. At risk is our quality of life and economic competitiveness as a city. Visit our website for more information and contact us at www.reconnectaustin.com.
Thank you very much. I had to get that little movie in there because we've been working on that project for 4 years. My grandson put the film together. My banker was the narrator. I had 2 planners in my office and an economist did all the research and text and numbers. The idea here is not to beautify the highway, which it does. It's to reconnect the grid and generate an economy that will result in a 20-year projected by our economists a $10 billion tax base for the city of Austin. Might even be a good way to lower my taxes. Thank you very much.
I'm remembering the things I didn't say to start off with, including our format. So we're going to, each of the speakers go in turn, and then we're setting up in really sort of a dialogues format for questions to all three. We got a good lead in to our next speaker, Derek Boss from the office of James Burnett in Houston, the designers of the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, and the infrastructure in Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma City project is important to Lubbock because our Chamber of Commerce have been there, our city leaders have been there, and they look to Oklahoma City as a model. So, Jarek?
Thank you, David. It's good to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to speak, and would like to thank Dean Williamson, David, Nan, and our good friend from Austin. A little bit about our office before we get into things. Urban geography. So I am, I guess in the group, I have never been an educator. I have been a projects guy from the time I graduated, and work with the office of James Burnett. And our focus is on built work. We do very little master planning. If we do master planning, it's usually with the goal in mind that we will be building something as soon as we complete that plan. So today what we would like to present are two different projects. I guess in the context of a city, I would think they're both micro. One is a 5-acre park in Dallas, so maybe that's the micro. The other is a 180-acre redevelopment in downtown Oklahoma City, where we reconstructed 9 miles of streetscapes on 17 street alignments. And so 180 acres, maybe in the context of a sprawling city like Oklahoma City, is micro, but we think it's maybe a macro project. But a little bit about our firm. We were honored last year as the ASLA Firm of the Year, and very excited to follow that up this year. In just a couple of weeks in New Orleans, Jim Burnett will be receiving the ASLA Design Medal. So very excited about that. We have 3 offices. I run the Houston office. We have about 25 people. We have 2 studios in the San Diego office where Jim Burnett has relocated. We have about 25 people as well, and they run 3 smaller studios. And then about 3 years ago, we opened an office in Boston. We kind of snuck in. Boston's kind of the home of landscape architecture in many ways, and didn't tell any of our friends that we would be moving into town, and snuck a couple of great projects, and have about 10 people working there. So we're about 60, and the 2 projects that we'll be talking about today were also both honored with ULI Open Space Awards in 2014 and 15. So feel very fortunate to have been part of great teams changing cities and changing the way people think. Clyde Warren Park began, and Sinclair talks about that they've been dreaming about this I-35 cap park in Austin for about 4 years. We began this idea of Clyde Warren, just started talking about it almost immediately when the freeway was sunk, but our involvement began really in 2003. We had just been hired to develop the new Ritz-Carlton hotel project in Dallas, in Uptown, and Jim Burnett was walking with John Zog from Crescent Real Estate, and John said, "Do you think people would ever walk from the Ritz-Carlton over to the DMA or the Nasher Sculpture Garden. And Jim said, well, let's walk over there, let's see. And as they were walking, they said, absolutely not. And John said, well, you know, we've got a little pot of money. Why don't you go away and think about this for a month, come back and bring us some ideas. So that's really kind of where the idea started. This is the location of the park. How do we do the little pointer? This is where Museum Tower is. This is the Nasher Sculpture Center, Dallas Museum of Art, and now all of these projects are being filled in with new towers from award-winning architects from around the world. A little bit about the park. It began as an idea kind of back in 2004. The Park Foundation was formed with John Zog from Crescent, Jody Grant from Texas Bank, and Linda Owen, who was with the Real Estate Council in Dallas. As they formed that foundation, they put $1 million together to do a study. With that $1 million, we did some preliminary engineering, really came up with a cohesive idea, put some pricing together, and came up with kind of this big, crazy number for this idea to see if it would work. In 2006, the city raised $20 million, and agreements started moving forward. In 2006 and 2007, there was a worldwide design competition. They went out to 50 firms. We were shortlisted with 4 and won the project, and we were off to the races. One of the conversations that David and I had in the car this morning, as I was in design school and thinking about my career, I was always most interested in design. The thing I have learned as I have practiced over the years, there are 2 skill sets that have become very important. One is really understanding economics and business, and 2 is understanding marketing. And so as we work on big projects, we're always trying to expand those projects, think outside of the limit line of work, and really understand how the financial components work. So to come up with this $112 million, there were various pots of money that came into play. City of Dallas, $20 million, TxDOT, $20 million. We actually received shovel-ready stimulus money that the Obama administration had put in place, trying to pull us out of the Great Recession. And then $55 million was raised from the private sector. And then the value that has been created from the park, they talk anywhere from $900 million to $2 billion worth of reinvestment right now. And with the completion of the park, residential units and condo towers, the Ritz-Carlton added a second phase to their project that's all housing now. When they announced that they would build Clyde Warren Park, Museum Tower committed and said, we will build our project. And so some of these projects can really transform an area of the city. There were a number of different major sponsors that contributed to this project. And then we were off to the races, really with the design. Ray Nasher was kind enough to open up his center for us. We hosted about anywhere from 300 to 350 people for a workshop. We brought everybody in, we walked the site, and just dreamed a little, covered the walls with posters. We gave everyone a sticker, green if it was important to you, red if it was less important, and then let people from the community present in that meeting. These are the ideas that our group came up with at the table, and then put this list together of what these survey results were. And it really helped us begin kind of these initial ideas for the program for what this park could be. It's interesting, some of the things that we pushed for were things that were very low on this list. We had just completed a park about 2 blocks from Millennium Park in Dallas, and had great success with a dog park and a children's garden, and said, we've really got to push these things. And everybody said, there are no dogs in downtown Dallas. There are no kids in downtown Dallas. And we built both of these elements in the park. They have been hugely successful. The dog park, people with their dogs, they come early in the morning, throughout the day, and they're there late at night. They are the eyes and ears and the unbadged policemen and policewomen of the park. And the kids have come from everywhere. And we're actually taking out the botanical section of the garden now and trying to double the size of the children's play area. So the program, botanical garden, children's garden, a seating grove that acts as a reading room. We have outdoor dining, Savor restaurant, the southwest deck, a big water feature plaza, the pavilion and restaurant were both designed by Tom Pfeiffer, who we had worked with on the Brockstein Pavilion at Rice University. The main event lawn, a big promenade and a lawn, the dog park, and then kind of a gaming area, and then another lawn. Right now, the children's garden will expand to this area, and there's a new water feature and art installation that's proposed for the other end of the garden. And then some of these components. And then this is the park before. So an active 8-lane freeway. One of the requirements and the challenges of this project was you cannot close the freeway. We have too many vehicles coming through this part of the city. And so there was a lot of coordination, a lot of finagling with TxDOT to install at off hours, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and really kind of working those schedules with various events downtown to install 300 plus box beams. And so in these images, you can start to kind of see this park coming together. The initial condition, some of these box beams kind of working their way across, and then beginning to fill up some of the foam and the soil systems, and putting all of this together, beginning the planting, and then finishing up with that hardscape. And then pulling this together and kind of having the completed project. And so these are some images of the park and some of the activities that happen in this space. You can see the museum tower in the background again, the Nasher, the DMA. One of the things that has changed in the discussions as all of these groups and stakeholders came together, the DMA is now free. So they have so many people coming that they've been able to increase the philanthropy and the donors who have contributed to the museum, and so it's bringing more people back downtown. Another thing that changed, these are feeder roads, and if you've ever been on a feeder road in Texas, it's about maybe going faster than freeway speeds, and even coming out of a restaurant on a feeder road or trying to get off, you're taking your life in your own hands. And so one of the big ideas was, what if we had parking along the side of the park and we had on-street parking on this feeder road? TxDOT said, absolutely not. We worked with the city of Dallas. We said, we've got to think outside the box. Who's your boss? Who can really help us make this decision? How can we maybe change some of this thinking? So we have on-street parking now on the feeder road. These lanes have narrowed. These traffic speeds have really slowed down. And as people come from the central business district or the arts district and they cross these TxDOT facilities, the traffic is much slower, much easier to work with. We also got a lay-by for a valet on a feeder road, which is kind of a crazy notion, again, when you think of feeder roads in Dallas. So a lot of great things happening. We also changed the freeway off-ramp, so it comes off and you make a hard left turn onto one of the connectors into the city. So some of the events that happened. The restaurant was about 6 months behind the completion of the park. And so one of the challenges is that the foundation, they wanted to have food and beverage as part of the program in the park. So they opened up and we had a number of food trucks that came. We had hugely underestimated how successful this would be. The lines were crazy. The food trucks are busy morning, throughout the day, and in the evenings, and whenever there's a special event. And at some point, the owners of the restaurant, and they had it written into their lease that there could be no competition in the park. They said, we'll rewrite the lease, don't let the food trucks go away. And now they have between 80 and 100 food trucks that are on the waiting list to be in the park at any given time. There are between 1,000 and 1,300 activities that happen each year in Clyde Warren Park. There's between 1.1 million and 1.2 million visitors that come to the park. And so programming of the park is a really key thing. Anything from concerts to piano lessons, knitting lessons. The Dallas Morning News sponsors a reading room. They have gaming events, so learning how to play chess tournaments, playing ping pong, pétanque. They have arts and crafts for the kids. They have storytelling that happens on a storytelling deck, dances and performance, and then big activities after work, before work, and on the weekends, whether it's Zumba or yoga. And they're always monitoring who's attending, how successful is it, and do we need to be making changes to keep this relevant to what people are really looking for. So these are some of these events on the weekend, and sometimes it's shoulder to shoulder in the park. And then you can see the reading room in the middle of the day. A place to be and be seen. Storytelling and poetry and, knitting on the trees. And families coming back downtown. And then the big promenade and people coming out of their offices and having lunch. And then the children's garden on the left. Lots of Texas natives. And then water in the children's garden. And the kids cry when they go home and they want to, when are we coming back, Mom? To me, this is maybe one of my favorite images. When we develop spaces, we always like to come and be kind of the spectator to see how people are using the space. And so to see this little girl in this garden is magical, that we've done some things that are right, that we got the program right. And then one of the water plazas that's packed in the summer. And then this water skin can be turned off and tented for events and activities or performances. And then the pavilion, great lawn in the back, the dog park. We added a putting green. That was one of the things. So people come down, they bring their putters, they talk a little business and talk a lot of smack, but enjoy the space. We also wanted the park to be beautiful, so if you're in your office building or you're in one of the residential towers, that you have something beautiful to look down on. Dog Parks continues to have more and more visitors. And then, like I said, 1,000 to 1,300 events. They have movie nights that are sponsored. And they have Wi-Fi in the park. And one of the things that we do in the park, Tara Green, who runs the Woodall Rogers Park Foundation, she had planned the Super Bowl event in Dallas, and now she runs the Park Foundation. They do counts, so they're curious who's in the park, and they keep track of, in these counts, how many women are in the park, how many children are in the park. So as long as there's more women and children in the park, they know things are going well and the park is very successful. If you have an urban space and you start to have more men in that space, then you need to make some changes. Your space is on the decline, is what we see from the research. They're also curious what the ages are in the park, and they keep track of races and genders and all of those good things, and how many people are logging on for Wi-Fi and what all these statistics are. So the Park Foundation, they raise all of the money that takes care of the maintenance and the security of the park. So they have a staff anywhere from 12 to 13. There's 24-hour security in the park. And so they're always concerned about making sure that everybody feels comfortable and welcome in this space. And then you can see, you know, a weekend event. And people of all ages and all walks of life are enjoying this space. This is the children's garden. It's crazy how busy it gets. And then as the garden fills in, and the food trucks, again, the dogs. And then to me, this is the great success, that you see families that may not come downtown coming back to downtown Dallas and exploring and saying, maybe next time we go to the art gallery, maybe next time we go shopping, or let's just walk around and reconnect with our city. And the restaurant. And movie night. They pack them in on the classics, which is really funny to me. These old black and white movies. And then they have the lighting of the Christmas tree. And the economic story has been phenomenal. Just a couple of quick things. So lease rates have increased anywhere from 30 to 60%. So pre-park lease rates to post-park lease rates. And then there have been 2 buildings within a quarter-mile radius of the park that have sold. One sold at a 40% increase of the pre-market value, and one sold at a 60% increase. So when you think about numbers in the $400, $350 million range, that's real money, and that makes real economic sense. So that $20 million that the city of Dallas starts to spend, and you start to see those lease rates increase and that tax increment, that money pays back, and they know they've made good decisions. And then in the office, we call it OJB Lab, which helps us with all of our sustainability metrics. We're looking at and monitoring, trying to understand how much water are we using on really what's a roof garden? How many trees do we have? What are some of our costs? What's the maintenance? How can we make these systems smarter for the next project? So second project, and tell me how I'm doing on my time. I'll talk fast. Okay, great. Project 180, totally different scale. Oklahoma City, lots of things happening. Devon Energy was being courted by the city of Houston. Come to the energy capital of the world. Larry Nichols, who had built his family business with his father, deciding that he wants to stay. That's kind of story number 1. Story number 2, Mick Coronet, the mayor of Oklahoma City. He realizes that over the last so many years, he's gained between 30 or 40 pounds. He's gotten fat working. Oklahoma City gets the cover of Prevention magazine, and they're called the least walkable city in America. Their planning department, led by Russell Klaus, great urban designer, great planner, they've won this coup, and they've decided that they're going to take the freeway that's running through downtown and bisecting it. They're going to tear it all down. It's an elevated freeway, and move it outbound of the city. That's kind of story number 3. So Devon decides to stay in town, and the city's also finishing a streetscape master plan. But one of the challenges is, as we began working on Devon's new headquarters, lost my train of thought. As we begin working on Devon Energy's headquarters, they start thinking, how can we make our city great again? What could we do? How could we form a partnership with the city to really expand some of the things that we want to do? We work around the globe. We've seen great cities. We've eaten at great restaurants. We've been to wonderful places, and then we come home. How can we bring that home? So there was this idea, what if we re-envisioned the central business district? So we looked at the master plan that had just been completed. It kind of looked backwards. It looked towards the boomer sooner, kind of the old West theme. And they said, we're not sure that this is the city that we would like to be. So So Devon put together a TIF. They had an $750 million, $800 million project that they were working on. They decided to front-end fund the project. So you get all that TIF money for 20 years, you get it on year one, and you can spend it and do all of those things. They put a list of projects together, and then they encompass this 180 acres, and then they say, we want to give this back to the city, and we don't want anyone to think that we've spent the money on themselves. So Devon's project is exempt from the TIF. So they don't spend any of this money on their own development. We kick off the project and decide we're going to survey 180 acres. We interview civil engineering firms and we say, can you survey the city in a month? They say, can't be done. How much can you give us in a month? Can you put all your crews on the project? And so in 45 days, we had surveyed all of downtown Oklahoma City, and in 60 days, we had the final survey for the project. We kicked off and hosted our first meeting in July. We had a design team coordination meeting. We set up a steering committee. And then by March of the following year, we issued a full aesthetics plan that totally rethought the streetscape master plan for a contemporary forward-thinking city. And then by August of that year, we issued bid package 1. So really coming together with amazing teams. So this shows one of our steering committee meetings. We met with city manager, assistant city manager, the director of public works, the parks director, the COPTA, which is their parking. We had all of the key decision makers blocked out for a full day. They met in the morning on the parks. We met in the afternoon on the streetscape so that we could make decisions and move forward as a team. That meeting was followed up the next morning by a consultant team that we assembled. We hired 22 firms. We had every civil engineering firm in town. We hired a local landscape architecture team to help us. And by March of the following year, so just 6-7 months later, we issued 1,300 sheets of drawings for a totally re-envisioned city, face of building to face of building. And then we set up a series of goals together. How can we create a cohesive central business district? How can we have a streetscape that's unique to Oklahoma City and the heart of what the city has been but wants to be? How can we create a new urban fabric that will support growth? Because this project would be something that would be an amazing catalyst for change and development. And then how can we work through accessibility? We want pedestrians, accessibility, bicycles, and vehicles to all have one system working together. And then how can we develop new sustainable standards? We looked at all the metrics, we walked, we took thousands of photos documenting every condition, every drive. We put a list of projects together with the Devon Implementation Committee that included the Myriad Botanical Gardens, the streetscape, improvements at the arena where the Thunder play, Bicentennial Park, the Arts Council, and the city lawn, and then began aggregating the money. So the Devon TIF contributing a big chunk of that money, and then general obligation bonds contributing another big piece, and then $10 million coming from the downtown utility money that was available every year. So every year they have between $10 and $11 million that they can spend on infrastructure downtown. And then just from the general fund, they decided to kick in $2 million every year. And then we were off. What were the roles of the project management team, the site analysis, leading the steering committee, looking at transportation plans, reading those plans, understanding them, really pushing ideas, figuring out what those deliverables would be, re-envisioning a new city. We drew all new details for their public works, so 300 new details that we drew, totally rethought how they would maintain the downtown. How will they pay for the maintenance? So we worked with their bid to figure out a pricing schedule and what would happen on a daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis for all of these improvements to keep them in place, keep them maintained. And then we went through the planning. What's the existing traffic plan? Where are the roads too wide, too big, too many lanes? Some of the streets had 4 lanes that were 14 feet wide. Cars were driving as much as 50, 55 miles through a little downtown. So we've got to fix these things. There were free right turns at all the intersections, huge pedestrian conflict. And then we put together a series of methodologies. Let's bring the city back to a 2-way system. Let's right-size all the lanes. Let's maximize parking. Let's make bike facilities a big component for this project, and drew a totally new traffic plan. And the local engineer said, the traffic will collapse. So we had to go out of state and find a traffic engineer that would send us a letter and say, I think this will work. And we said, trust us. We looked at smaller radiuses on the corner, and one of our partners in Public Works, her husband worked for the fire department, so we were proposing from the 30-foot radiuses that they had at the corners, we said, let's do 15-foot radiuses, and they said, you can't do it. So he borrowed a fire truck, and we painted a 15-foot radius in the pavement, and it worked. We called San Francisco, New York, Dallas, Portland, and Salt Lake City, and said, what are you guys doing to change things? And we talked to their planning and public works departments so that we could prove to our team what other engineers and contemporaries were trying to do in other cities to make their cities great. And then we started to vision with ideas. We looked at the parking. We restored some of the historic conditions around the Civic Center and the City Hall building. And then we started to solve the accessibility. We built a ton of models because they gave the scale and the context. We looked at a bike facility program, so making the bikes part of each of the key streets downtown, and looked at bike rack locations, looked at bike sharing, and everybody said, no one will ride a bike downtown. So the city manager said, look, I'll put on some biking shorts and ride a bike. You can put it on the city channel. And he showed people how you could ride a bike downtown. And they played it again and again and again. Walkability and open space was important. How can we connect the plazas and the green space downtown? How can we bring back some of the historic character of the old city hall and have a contemporary feel to that of a forward-thinking city? And then starting to proof up all of these pieces with a clearly defined street zone of 10 and 11-foot lanes, a bike lane, on-street parking, a great amenity zone that separates pedestrians from traffic, and then storefront zones for all of this new retail and restaurants that would come in, and really working the pedestrian realm so that it works and people want to walk. And then we started to draw everything. We figured, I think we can build it beautiful just as cheap as we can build it not so great. But we have to get a module. And so we did all of these different studies, looking at the roads, the pedestrian realm, the vegetation, and then again, this is what the road can feel like. This is what it can feel like in the model. Everybody knows where they're supposed to be, the car, the bike, the pedestrian, crossing traffic, and then getting all of these systems with the pull boxes and all of that in the right spots. And then setting a palette of materials together from signage and lighting, all new LED lighting in the city of Oklahoma City. First city in America that has all of their downtown. 3,000 LED poles. It's amazing. And then all of these urban elements and urban fixtures that make up that comfortable amenity zone. And then showing them what are they going to look like. And then pushing the envelope. New parking. Sustainable parking. Green parking. They said, no, we're an oil city. We don't We don't drive electric cars. Let's just put them in. We can get a grant. We got a grant. Not only did we get a grant for electric parking, we also got bike share. We got 8 bike share locations, which was amazing. So thinking differently and working together and pushing people, and then selecting local materials that'll be durable, that'll be classic, but still have a contemporary feel, and even down to what kind of a detectable warning are we going to use downtown. And then we started working through the vegetation, working with the urban forester from the state, picking hardy trees, working with local nurseries, and then looking at all of these varieties and trees in planting, in gravel, and in grates, getting those right trees in place, and then getting all of the systems right. So all of the trees are kind of planted in a continuous soil trench, so that we put a $200 tree in an $800 tree pit. So we have an amazing tree that will last for years and years, and showing how do all these components come together, and then getting the medians just right so that these plant materials could take the wind, the rain, the hail, the ice that you get in Oklahoma City. Seasonal color, texture, qualities to that. And then the project update. How's it done? We started building almost a year from when we kicked off, which we thought was amazing. So bid package 1 happening in 2009, bid package 7 just completing now. So these are all of these streets that you see in color, we finished. And the really important thing in collaborating is not just collaborating with your steering committee, but collaborating with the local design team that's going to help you implement this. And then working with the people who will have the boots on the ground. So Kenny with Public Works, who does construction administration, so he feels part of it, so he feels the pride that we're building this right, and understanding how all these things go together. And then doing mock-ups that all of the bidding contractors can see, constructing it. Again, doing another mock-up, and then building the soil trench and seeing all these systems start to come together. And then the completed project. Outdoor cafes coming back online, bike share, women coming back downtown by themselves, running. Weekend activities coming back downtown. Grandma bringing her grandchildren back downtown to talk about it. Young couples moving downtown and deciding to stay. And then new infill happening. All these systems working together for something clean and contemporary. I love this. These guys, they were from out of town, and they had rented bikes to drive around Oklahoma City. I just loved that picture. And then all these systems coming together. And then the benefits of this, all new streets. Unofficial numbers, they've talked about $2 billion of reinvestment since Project 180 began. And then reinvestment in the old. So taking a building scheduled to be demolished, adding a new twist, bringing restaurants and people back downtown. So thank you.
Okay. Questions? And you can direct them to any one, all three, or however you see fit. So.
Well, that was easy.
If it's okay, I guess I'll ask the first question and direct it to all of y'all. But all of us seem very interested in the embodied as causing some sort of level of social interaction with the surrounding community. My question for all of y'all is, how do you begin to create a armature that encourages the evolution of that social interaction in what y'all deem a good or positive direction?
I like that you chose the word armature, because armature could be physical, right? Like a physical structure around which people gather, or it could be more metaphorical, a structure, a kind of a social structure perhaps. And obviously every situation is different. And we all do our investigation at the beginning, and we learn about that location and what's there. And to me, it is that asset inventory at the beginning. You know, what's already there. So if you're doing, you know, and a highlight of my visit here has been First Friday, which is absolutely amazing. And to see the energy there last night, and just, you know, people, I think a sign of good urbanism is when you see happy people walking around, and they were happy, so that's good urbanism. And for that, if you're going to intervene there, you'd say, well, what do we already have that's good? And then what needs to be added? So that's the physical armature, what you're going to add. The social armature comes from engaging people in that process. And Jarek did a good job of showing us the process that they use when they're working on Oklahoma City or the park in Dallas, getting people involved. And it's very important that that engagement piece, it's usually required for most city projects, not private projects, but, or is it required for private? Not required.
Not required, but we typically will try and do that,
yeah,
even with private projects.
So most people do it, but often, you know, you've probably heard it, they call it CYB, community engagement, cover your butt, community engagement. We did it. Let's do it and say we did it. But they don't do it well. They don't do it in a way that really gives people the information that they need to provide good feedback, and doesn't really respect them and appreciate them. Remember the bottom of that shift. You have to do it with an attitude of respect and appreciation, not like I'm the expert and I know better, and I just have to do this because the city is requiring me to do it, and I'm going to not listen to anything you say. That attitude of respect and appreciation builds the social armature, so they're not only rooting for you, they're actually helping to make it happen. People are making connections with other people and building support for the project, so that when time comes to implement it, the resources are already there to support it, and then it happens.
So typically, when we begin a project, so you would think I only work on projects in Houston, but I'm actually working in Milwaukee, Atlanta, and Richmond, Virginia. So typically when we come to a project, we know the least about the context for where we're working. So whether it's our client group or a community group, we're always trying to understand what the context of the project is, what makes this place unique. And a lot of the ideas, whether it's Clyde Warren or even the streetscape in Oklahoma City, they're the ideas from the people that we meet with, and the questions that we ask and the questions that they ask us. One of the things that Jim Burnett always does, and we tell everyone in the studio, if before we present to the team or begin presenting ideas, you better ask 1,000,000 questions, because Jim's going to ask the question, or someone else is going to ask the question that you haven't asked. And so we're always trying to ask, you know, what makes this place special? What's unique? What do the people do? What's the history? What are the big ideas? What are the unrealized ideas? So I think when you ask all the questions, when you get to that design solution, when you work on that spiral to get to the top, that's where you find the genius in it. And when you have those other people that have collaborated and contributed, then they're excited for that end product as well.
Well, as far as armature is concerned, I think the physical armature of that Creeks plan was a bold idea. It's largely unimplemented to date. We're facing a bond issue where there's like $120 million going to be available for corridors and parks. Well, some of it may get implemented, but the Great Streets Master Plan, which covered 300 blocks of downtown, is exactly intended to be that physical armature for social life. And Second Street has proven that equation out 1,000%. It's been in place for about 5 or 6 years, maybe more. So many people have come to us and said, wow, we heard you talking about that for your whole life, but we didn't see it until it happened. And then for the next couple of years, every opening news scene at night on the news would be right there on Second Street. And it's often part of a newscast or a feature show or something. But you think about what's there now: a JW Marriott, it's 1,000 rooms. ACL is right there. There are numerous restaurants. There's another 1,000-room hotel being built beyond the convention center. And they're either directly or indirectly related to that street. And I know for a fact that the W Hotel and condo building, where the ACL is, decided to go there because of the street. When asked, why did you pick that site? When, figure a W Hotel can have any site they want. And the answer was, have you seen that street? And so the net result at this point is several $billion in tax-based creations. But people are there. Nobody was ever there, ever. People say, oh, well, Austin economy is so strong it would have happened anyway without the street. It didn't happen for the 85 years previous, but it happened in 5 years afterwards.
Thank you. Okay.
So many plans get dusty sitting on shelves. Can you talk about finding the synergy and energy to take a project from the planning and design phase into the implementation phase, and how that you've seen that done in the projects?
This is the city planner from Roswell, New Mexico.
Those plans that are getting dusty on your shelf? Yeah. So if they're not getting implemented, you're probably, if you look at the spiral, you're in the proposal stage, right? But they're not getting implemented. So what you actually need to do is spiral down. You have to spiral down before you can spiral up. And I brought in on a number of projects like this. People say, we have this great idea and we can't get it implemented, and not, or we don't have support from this one or that one, can you help? And they usually hire me like they think I'm going to be a lobbyist for their idea. And I tell them I'm not a lobbyist, and that the idea might need to be massaged a little bit. And if they say okay, then I'll come in and I'll spiral everybody back down to prospecting. And prospecting isn't just about prospecting the site. That's, it's not just doing asset inventory and seeing what other buildings are there and view corridors and ground conditions and all of that. Prospecting, it has to do with the team itself. So if you have a team of planners at the city, or maybe you've hired consultants, you work with that team first, and there are actually 3 steps to prospecting. And the first one, it sounds very touchy-feely, but it asks each person to say, what do you think should happen here? Go off into your own corners. Go off in your own corners and write and draw what you think should happen here. And that part's really important. That's the listening to themselves part. And what happens if you don't get that out is that you can't listen to other people, because that little voice is screaming inside you, so loudly, like you feel like you shouldn't say it because you want to be a good team member and you want to listen to everybody, but really that voice is screaming inside of you so loudly that you can't really listen to anyone else, so you're not being a good team member, and you're probably not listening when you do your community engagement. So you have to get it out. Then that's step 1 of prospecting. Step 2 of prospecting is you all come together, and I do this in my studios and workshops. I have each student the first week do their own thing completely. They don't talk to each other. Then they bring it back and they share it with everybody. And when you share, you might think that everybody's going to fight for their own ideas. That doesn't happen. When everybody shares, the best ideas rise up, and everyone will say, well, that's good, and you start blending ideas together, and that's the polish stage. So you're now at step 2, you're polishing that gold, okay? And then together, and with your larger constituency, your stakeholders, you get to 3, which is the proposal. So you've spiraled back down in order to come back up. Now you've got a proposal. It's not going to be the same, I guarantee you, as that same proposal that was sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And you're rallying the resources to implement it because you've been widening the circle, you're engaging your stakeholders who are now going to say, yeah, I like that. I see me in there. I contributed to that and I want to support it.
Do either one of you guys want to respond to that? If not, we'll take another.
We don't see so many of these bad projects being constructed, and I like to think optimistically that they all started with a good intention or a good idea behind them, but then are taken through the stages of the design and kind of altered to become this bad project. How do y'all keep this integrity throughout your project?
It's not real easy because in any case, no matter where you are, you're up against a lot of friction. Worse than that, you're up against a lot of institutional ossification. You've got this department and that department. You've got siloisms. These departments don't talk to each other, and it's just really hard, particularly at the urban scale. That's the nice thing about private practice of architecture. Somebody has control of that site and has an agenda. And architects typically, because of that, don't think beyond that site, which is the problem with the profession. And I think most architects know that. But really the institutional ossification, what I guess is the term, and I speak to that because I've been arm wrestling with TxDOT for 4 years on that highway project. And then you've got the asleep at the wheel thing. The city's asleep at the wheel, the university's asleep at the wheel. I showed them how the university, you know what the campus is referred to in Austin as the 40 acres? It's actually the 450 acres now. But it's called the 40 acres. And so I showed the university administration how depressing the highway like that through the campus would create 40 acres of land. So we call it the next 40 acres. That's beyond downtown. And it benefits that new med school, that hospital district, that creek, which is right there, totally compromised by the highway. And all of those people have their own agenda, their own silo. And so it's kind of hard to get an idea into that arena. It's real hard. We've managed pretty well in 4 years. Public opinion is pretty much on our side. There are now about a dozen organizations collecting letters telling TxDOT, quit threatening us with building it again as elevated and have only one option, and that is to depress it. I mean, Chamber of Commerce and the Sierra Club, for instance. How do you get those on the same page?
I think one great piece of advice, I remember one of the first meetings I went to with Jim. We were sitting in the meeting, and after the meeting, I was talking to a few people, and he pulled me aside and he said, he's the decision maker, and she has the money. They are the most two important people in the room. And so while you're taking notes, and all the notes are important, you need to listen carefully to each of their ideas, and you need to always be engaging with them. So when there are those who control projects or can shape the destiny of those, if you're aligned with their goals and you can develop a dialogue with them and you can work through that process together, then I think you have a much greater success in those things. And the other thought that we have in the studio is a great project doesn't necessarily have to be the most expensive project. In the landscape, you can do wonderful projects for $100 a square foot, but you can also do amazing projects for $10 a square foot. So the diagram can be very beautiful in each of those, and the execution can be at different levels as well. So that's how we always fight for design, and we never quit designing. So if it makes sense, we have a project there just getting ready to buy the plants. We're changing the whole planting scheme right now to make some tweaks because it's going to be better. So the documents are never finished.
And I don't think you mentioned that your firm did the landscape here at Texas Tech.
So we did a lot of the new trees that you see on the main drive into the campus. I didn't actually work on that project, but some guys in California did. So I was on an early morning walk this morning, taking lots of pictures, seeing how things are coming in.
This is really important what you're hearing here. This question you ask, I think, is something you hear a lot from architects and landscape architects about value engineering. I mean, I heard, I don't know if it's true, that O'Neill Ford doesn't claim this building is his because it got value engineered away from what he wanted it to be. And that's common. And it has to do with the tradition. Remember I showed you those different traditions? Which one is the dominant tradition in school? The form-making avant-garde. That's the dominant tradition in architecture schools, is the form-making avant-garde, not the humanist, not the ecological. Remember, the form-making avant-garde is about shocking, transgressing. You know, it's not about working in partnership, which is the reality. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist. It's very important to have the form-making avant-garde. Every great city has a form-making avant-garde. But you want to combine them and do different things at different times, different things with different clients, maybe combine them all in the same project. The form-making avant-garde often doesn't have regard for budget or time frame and things like that, and then they say, my project doesn't look good because it got value engineered out. But it's really about partnering and an attitude of respect from the beginning.
Okay, I think we have time for one or maybe two questions, depending how, well, I see at least two. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Evans, this is more a question for you. Your sideways urbanism is really glaringly different from other kinds of urbanism in its implementation process and also the full engagement of people throughout the whole process. Now, as you pointed out on that slide, landscape urbanism is not really good on the people front. And Charles Waldheim was actually quick to point out last night that they don't want to downplay that factor, so he was quick to point that out. Now, granted, landscape urbanism is actually both academically and scientifically a very advanced agenda. So that's the good thing about it. Now, how would you imagine landscape urbanism would look if they were to actually engage people?
It would look like good urbanism. Yeah, you're right, and I don't, you know, landscape urbanism really advanced, I think, what we're doing in urbanism. And the creative tension between the landscape urbanists and the new urbanists has been really good. It's required each of them to sharpen their saw and to think more deeply about how to address all these issues, because they were predisposed to think about certain things and not the others, both of them. So when they came together and something happens with them together, it really is good urbanism that addresses all of those issues, I think.
It's interesting that when landscape urbanism started being discussed, Stefanos Palazoidis, who's one of the four founders of New Urbanism, got busy and wrote a whole new chapter for the CNU Charter, which had to do with everything from landscape to climate change. About 8 years ago, maybe 10.
And landscape urbanism tried to change its name to ecological urbanism to get away from that. They didn't really succeed, and people still call it landscape urbanism, but they've tried to bring in more of the humanist component.
Okay. Did you have a question, Mary Alice?
Yeah, and I think this coincides with the previous question. I'm kind of wanting, we're about to wrap up, but I'm kind of
want to bring it back full circle to some of the things we heard yesterday from Charles, and thinking about, in particular, when he talks about re-engaging our tools, you know, as a way of describing the city and how we explore that, the theoretical position of landscape urbanism and the expression of that, and then thinking that if we come from a position of theory and we move towards a position of application, that you know, we have throughout time have always looked at a variety of ways of describing the city, and a lot of what we hear today are the practical applications of a great deal of that. Yet the discourse in landscape urbanism is highly theoretical. And I'd love to hear and I don't think it's an easy answer either, but perhaps just some comment about how one takes that expression and one then considers it as a direction for the future. And the reason I say that is because the response to the last question appeared to me as though we're saying landscape urbanism from that perspective fits into the existing formula. And I'm actually asking the opposite, which is, like, is there a place that we move where we are today that is driven by the theoretical discourse that landscape urbanism explores and expresses? And you can talk, I mean, it's a loaded question.
I'll take to insert. I really appreciate this question. Kind of as co-running the symposium, this was really the ultimate goal. Is the macro micro isn't size. The macro micro is how does one have a kind of larger agenda that I would argue does deal with people and ecology. And I think that the interesting thing about the last night and today is hopefully seeing that urbanism works at a local or at an implementation scale as well as a theoretical scale. And that those things find a way to work themselves out, I suppose, in an academic context, because we do work theoretically to achieve an end product. What I want to point out, though, that I think, or that I hope for, is that you claim that we already know what to do. The issue isn't what to do in urbanism. But I could argue that civilization gave us that example. We've always known. It's a natural necessity for people to organize urbanistically. And so I think that hopefully urbanism isn't just now we're done with what to do, because the what is a basic need for us. I hope as students, or I hope as kind of the intellectual aspect of the symposium, we've never been at this level of civilization. So there's still a lot left to learn about with the what. It's how do we deal with this particular civilization that might even live in their homes forever, right? We have Wi-Fi and get things delivered. So I would encourage that this isn't over, for sure, that there's so many more opportunities to think about how do we address cities, because we've reinvented it every 50 years or so for all of history, for all of time. And so I think that that's where landscape urbanism comes in as this catalyst at a time where that was super necessary, where we had to check ourselves and say, what are we doing with our cities? Let's think about it in a different way. Let's prompt new what's and new agendas that can kind of access a macro agenda. And I hope that continues to cycle, and that it's not just about, okay, we know what urbanism is, let's just do it and find out how to do it over and over again. I hope that this spawns a discussion between those two things.
Okay, and none of you got to answer that question, because we have one more, and it is one more question because this is not a joke. We have to catch the last plane out of Lubbock today. So that's the truth. So right back here.
So first of all, thank you all for bringing a really great topic, which makes us rethink about our profession, including architecture and exterior architecture and design in our life. My question is tying with your question and the last question as well, because we have a really busy paradigm in design setting, urbanism, smart growth, and need for neighborhood development. They have their own paradigm in US and Europe, we all know that. And then like currents in but in the practical way and also technical level, I mean, men talk about the importance of the partnership between private property and other stakeholders. If we are looking at those areas where more ecological values and dimensions are appreciated, I think somehow it may be a little bit challenging to tackle with those things. While maybe some areas with TIF, tax incremental financing, it may be relatively easier to deal with that, even though we have some difficulties, we have our own ignorance and try to make it better and improve that area. Or the areas where more ecological, information and also improvement are needed, even the partnership we have, sometimes we feel more normative design rather than having, the people's ignorance, right? So I don't think we all have some kind of ignorance or any project we can deal with the people for the area where we intervene.
These are great questions. Do we have a minute or no?
Go ahead.
Okay, and now I'm really understanding like the basis for why you wanted to have this symposium. You're right. I mean, we're the only species of all species that creates habitats that are not sustainable. How strange. We're supposed to be the smartest ones, right? We're supposed to have the biggest brains, and yet they're all building sustainable habitats, and we're not. And the question is why? And it's almost as though we have outsmarted ourselves because our brains have a part of them that allows us to be in denial. And so we can live and say everything's fine when everything's not fine. We're able to do that. So we've outsmarted ourselves and we end up having these unsustainable habitats. The question is, how do we, and survival and building habitats that are sustainable is an instinct of all species, and we have that instinct, but we have buried it. How do we uncover that buried instinct? Okay, that is actually the topic of my current book. It's called Habitat Instinct. I call that our habitat instinct. How do we uncover it? And a lot of it has to do with connecting. And so we've heard about urban connections. We hear about urban connections all the time. Connections between people. What I talked about before when I said I have all my students go their separate ways, that's connections with yourself. When you're saying, what do I think? Because we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from others, and we're disconnected from the places we live. So, and the amount of knowledge has grown over the years, so people become more and more specialized, which means we've got more and more silos that get more and more rigid. Connections amongst the disciplines and professions like we're doing in our college with the interweaving. So that's, to me, is kind of the direction to go in, is to admit it, that we have built habitats that are not sustainable, that we're not in touch with our habitat instinct, that we need to recover it, and through making connections on these various levels.
Final word, Jared?
Final word.
It's funny because we were talking about landscape urbanism or the different things, and one of the guys in the studio teaches at Rice, and he said, who cares what you call it if you get to the right solution? And the right solution comes through collaboration and getting all of the ideas. So maybe that's a really simplistic way. I'm the least academic and maybe the least well-read, but to me the lessons of design have come from building the spaces and seeing how people use them, and as you're designing the spaces, doing all the dumb things, pacing them off. How big is this? How wide is it? How tall is it? What's the scale feel like? What's the canopy going to be? What's the architecture? So it's those connections that we're trying to make.
Okay, this is words of wisdom time.
Who cares what you call it? That's pretty wise. It's some interesting points have come up in the questions. As an architect, you're probably trained, at some point you have calibrated eyeballs. You can measure something and guess its measurement. You can find out a measurement. You can calibrate everything. But we're not taught how to calibrate people. We do observe, and we are people, I mean, I base almost everything I do on experience, my own experience. That's the only one I have. And travel, seeing what other people do. And then I go and see how they use that space, like on 2nd Street or Central Market or the courtyard where my office is. And learn from that every time. So seeing the world with your calibrated eyeballs is one thing. Seeing it as people, the actors playing out the play is another.
Ta-da.